Hey, this is Judah Mantel for SceneForge Studio, and in this video I'm going to go over version 0.6.23. It has a couple really great new features that I'm really excited about, so let's jump right in. So first, some less exciting things. You can now tint the material of any primitive object. So for example, if I have a cube here, you can set the material to be whatever you want. I'll just set it to this sandy wall. I can then use this little tint button to adjust the color to be whatever I want. It's just useful for designing previs for sets and things like that, and backdrops, and it's very useful. Next is an improvement to the way the video surface objects work, and now they're much more flexible and you can do a lot more with them. So I'm going to go to Create Dynamics Video Surface, and previously these were only for chroma key or only for compositing, and you can project composite footage onto here as a 3D object. But there's so much more potential for these objects that you can do so much more, and previously it wasn't possible, so now I just added that in. When you select on an object, the first thing you'll see in the Properties menu is the content type. Now by default, it says video or image, which I'll show in a minute, but you can also switch to compositing, which is exactly how it was before. So you have all the same functionality, it's just behind this drop-down menu that is there now. So let's say you wanted a video or image. This is great for projecting either a screen, a TV in your 3D scene, or as a backdrop, or for playing videos, and I'll show a couple examples in a minute. So you can select the content file, which I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my downloads folder, and I'm going to bring in this image of a skyline. So you can see now I can use this as a backdrop for a character standing in front of it, or I can put this outside a window of a floor plan, which is great to kind of simulate the background sky. But there's a couple things you'll note. One, it has shadows applied to it. So if it was dark out, you wouldn't be able to see anything. And that's why you can use the same material settings you could with chroma key. So I can enable it. So now it's an unlit material. So now it completely ignores lighting in the scene. And if it's not a unlit material, you can adjust the metallicness and smoothness for reflections and things like that, and it's very useful. Now this is just a static image, but you can also do this with a video clip. And I can just select any video I want, and now it will play on a loop on this screen. So I'm sure you can imagine if I were to set up a window in my floor plan here, if I can find my floor plan, you can see I can bring this outside, position it downward, and with some lights or whatever, you can see we have a nice skyline outside of our window, and this is animated and everything like that. What's also useful is that this will automatically set itself to the correct aspect ratio of whatever you import. So for example, if I were to import a much more oddly sized image, if I go to my project over here, and I import this image of a LUT, which I talked about in a previous video, you'll see now it'll automatically scale itself to match the aspect ratio, so you won't have to deal with any squashed or stretched footage or images that you might have had to previously if you tried to use a cube as your backdrop. So I'm going to reset this to this nice video, which I think looks really great. And there we have that. So now let's talk about the more fun thing in this release, and that is the real-time global illumination system. And to demo that, I'm going to go inside here to my Star Destroyer set. And this is a 3D object from Sketchfab, and you can see it looks pretty good, but it does have light shining through, which is not what we want for a standalone room. So let's bring this all the way down, and of course now it is pitch black. Now a couple things we can do. Of course we can go into our scene, grab the light bulb that is somewhere here, and just increase the intensity. So, great. We can see our scene here if we position it correctly, and yeah, it looks pretty good. But if you know anything about what this model is supposed to be, you'll notice that these patterns here are supposed to be lights. They're supposed to give off lighting to the scene. So what we can do is if I select the model, I'm going to click Edit Materials, and in this example I know that the small door wall light has the emissive map. You can see it has an emission map, which indicates where parts of the material should emit light. And when paired with a bloom effect, which I'll open up now, go to my post-processing and increase the bloom. As I increase the emission intensity, and of course set a color of white, you can see that we now have this glow coming from these lights. And we can tint it whatever we want, which is really great, and do some interesting things. But it's not actually casting light on our scene. It's just giving off this glow effect, and of course we have the nice reflections on the ground, but that's not true light. So what we can do is use this new real-time global illumination system to simulate or give the illusion of light bouncing from these emissive surfaces onto our scene. So I'm going to go to my visual settings, and I'm sure you've noticed there's a new slider here called Indirect Light Intensity, or SSGI. And you can see that as I increase this, we get actual light coming from our emissive surface here. Now, of course, you could go crazy with it and make it super washed out, but you probably want something between 1 and 3 to be realistic. And once you have that dialed in, you're going to want to use the material properties to adjust the actual emission intensity. And you can see now, even if I change the color, because it's fully real time, our simulated light will be in that color, and all the things that you'd expect if this was real light. Now, there are a couple of things to note. One is that obviously this is a graphically intensive process, so keep that in mind when you use certain hardware. But most importantly, this is a screen space effect, SSGI, screen space global illumination, meaning that as I move my camera down and the lights are no longer on the screen, you'll see the effect will die out. Because in order for this to really work, it requires the lights to be on the screen or visible by the camera to some degree. You can see the fact that this is a reflective object certainly helps, because even if the lights are gone, the reflections are still there. But because of that, you're going to want to keep in mind the movement of your camera. You can see as I move the camera around, the light will fade out as it's no longer on the screen. So for static cameras that don't move, this works really great. So just keep that in mind as you're editing your scenes. So you can see I can make this a nice white color, increase the intensity, and play around with it like so. Now, of course, there aren't any real lights in the scene, but if I were to add some fog, make sure this is a volumetric light and increase the intensity of this, we can do some really interesting and really atmospheric and moody lighting using this effect, as well as real lights in the scene. So you can do some really cool things with this. And so that is basically everything in this release. I highly recommend playing around with this system. It is available to pro users only, so just keep that in mind. And have a lot of fun with it, because it is really powerful and you can do some amazing things, especially when paired with ray trace reflections, as you can see here. We get really nice reflections on the ground for much more accurate lighting. And so with that, that is everything in this release. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.